This is Lily, and at the time that this video was taken, she was on the mend from a pretty gnarly case of sarcoptic mange. So her skin's a little rough and she's got pretty patchy fur, but you'll see she's still doing pretty normal puppy stuff. And take a look at her tail when she's playing with her stuffy versus playing with her leash. So not a super overt difference, but I noticed that the tail starts to move a little bit wider and it's also accompanied with more kind of goofy, um, fluid, bouncy movement with the leash. So I would wager that her preferred toy is her leash and not the stuffed toy. All right, this is Soho, and she's gonna say hello, and we can see what kind of a medium level of arousal, very affiliative social dog looks like.
Soho, hi. Oh my goodness, Soho, hey, Soho.
And again, full booty wiggling, tail taps on every side of the butt.
Hi, sweetie. Hi. Soho.
And then finally, I've got Apollo, who he's an MHS alum. And what's fun about Apollo is his tail is actually cropped. So we have to make some inferences in what the tail might look like if the whole thing was there. But this is another reason why it's great to rely on the broader picture and look at his body language overall. Got a loose, bouncy, inefficient movement. The tail almost doesn't even matter, right? In moving the dog, we're having a good time, entertaining himself. Some other kind of basic tail things to be aware of. We've talked a little about this already, but seeing a low tail, particularly when it's wrapped around the body or tucked underneath the body, this is a pretty universal sign of a fearful and stressed dog asking for distance. This tail, this is obviously a still photo, but the tail is low but wagging. This kid is maybe a little bit unsure. If I remember correctly, this photo was taken when this puppy was stepping onto a portable scale for the first time, and there are snacks on the scale, so he's curious about it, but just sort of like not sure what's going on. And then here we've got a low tail and focus with even that little bit of a head tilt. So this can again just be somebody who's concentrating really hard and the arousal level is increasing, so the tail is starting to flake a little bit more. A high flagging tail can be an indicator that we need to lower the temperature on the interaction. These are these two beagles that showed up earlier in the presentation. So here we've got straight spine, tail is straight up, and we can't tell if it's moving or not. I would wager it's probably, flagging a little bit. And then if we kind of look at the tight ear position here, this dog looking away with whale eye, this is a kind of stressed situation. Tail straight out and relaxed, it's a little turkey, neutral and content, and a high stiff tail. So we've got a high stiff tail here. This is not as high of a tail, but the tail, if you had a video, his tail was actually flicking back and forth. That's a sign that we're getting a little over aroused, and it's just an early warning signal, especially if you're working with a dog that you don't know very well, that we want to, instead of leaning into that arousal increase, try to lower the temperature on it. Arousal can tip into aggressive or unsafe behaviors pretty easily, especially when we're working with an animal that we don't have built up trust with. And speaking of that, so all behavior serves a function, and this is wildly more complicated than the information that's on this slide, but to give you a pretty basic overview of functional analysis with behavior and applied behavior analysis, behavior does three things, maybe one of three things, maybe two of three things. So any behavior is signaling a request to decrease distance between the individual and a trigger or a stimulus. You might be signaling a request to increase distance between a stimulus and the individual, and then there's an overlying emotion to those behaviors. So decreasing distance means I want to engage with you. Increasing distance means I do not want to engage with you. And interestingly, a lot of folks don't necessarily put this together immediately, but distance increasing behaviors are inclusive of aggressive behaviors. So aggression is ultimately a request or maybe demand to back up. It's not necessarily that rushing forward. And sometimes even when an animal is offensively aggressing towards you, it's not necessarily because they want to close distance with you. It's because they were trying to get you to go away from them. So keeping that in mind can be really useful. We can go down a whole rabbit hole about dog predation sequence and how that falls into or doesn't fall into the category of aggression. It's a whole thing that we're not going to talk about today, but aggression boils down generally to distance increasing behaviors that may or may not be safe. And some of the things we might be looking at are, again, that agonistic pucker, turning your head, hard staring, growling, tooth exposure. The body is generally pretty tense. And when I say in alignment, I mean that the head, shoulders, spine, and tail are all kind of in a straight line, rather than if you were doing that bird's eye view over the dog, you see a little bit more looseness. On the other side, distance decreasing stuff, these are signals of like, let's hang out. So we'll see more of a loose body, more of a curve to a spine. And you can see here, Luna, she's like actively leaning in to Gus in this picture. Soft eye contact, maybe a muzzle nudge, maybe some meta signals like play bows. And then of course, emotion can range in the animal. So each individual will have different ways of telling us how they're emotionally feeling. We have to do a little bit of extrapolation. We can't actually ask the dog specifically what. So typically we're on safer ground if we're focusing on, are we seeing distance decreasing or distance increasing behaviors, then what emotions are we seeing? So again, aggression almost always serves the function of increasing distance. Aggression is not any one thing. It's a collection of behaviors that communicate a challenge, a threat, an intent to harm. And most aggression is fear-based. So I've read, I think Ray Coppinger cites that 90% of aggression in dogs is fear-based, but I'm going to be totally real with you. I have not read that book in a long time, and I don't know what data that's based on. I can say in my personal experience that the most of the aggression and aggressive behaviors that I see in shelters or in, with private clients, there is an element of fear going on there. So that proves true in my personal experience. And from what I understand, the research also proves that to be fairly common. So any dog can use aggression to communicate that they need space, and as a kind of beacon of light in the field, Dr. Susan Friedman says, listen to their whispers so that they don't need to yell. And what I mean by that is pay attention when a dog is subtly turning their head away from you so that they don't have to agonistic pucker and lunge at you later when you haven't listened to those early signals.